Hi everyone, my name's Rachel. I'm the CEO of SANE. Before I begin this little Q&A, I would like to acknowledge that at SANE we acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands we live and work on, and we pay our respects to elders past and present. I'm very pleased to be joined by Jade. Jade, thanks for coming along to join me with this chat to talk to our community about the referendum and the yes vote. Could we start perhaps? Could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thanks for having me on, Rachel. So about me, I'm from the Bunda clan of the Gurang Nation. So I grew up on my grandmother's country, which is over on the east coast of Queensland, Bundaberg, and I now live on Larrakia country up in Darwin, also known as Garamilla, and I'm raising a beautiful family up there. And I spent 20 years in the public service, predominantly in youth justice, and then moved more broadly into Aboriginal affairs. And I left the public service about a year ago so that I could speak about this important referendum that's coming up. And we'll get into what's in the proposal in just a moment, but just to set the scene a little bit about me, the real reason that I'm on this campaign is, as a mother of two Aboriginal teenagers that I'm raising in the Northern Territory, the statistics are indicating that it's more likely that my kids will go to prison than university. So, as a mum, I'm just out there doing whatever I can to change the future for my kids and make their dreams a possibility. So, I think a lot of parents can relate to that. And people in general, we always want better for the next generation. So that's why I'm on the campaign, and that's why I'm, really pleased to be sharing information about the voice with you today in the hope that people can make informed decisions come the 14th of October.
Thanks so much, Jade. I really appreciate you sharing that lived experience and your personal perspective. It's something we really identify with here at SANE. A little bit about who we are. SANE is a national organisation committed to supporting people and families who are impacted by complex mental health issues and trauma. About 6% of the people we support are Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander. And one of the really important roles that we play is providing information and education to our community about things that affect them. So I'm so pleased to have you chatting to me today to talk a little bit to our community about what the referendum is and what it means. So if it's okay with you, I've got a couple of questions to help tell our community a bit more about what this all means. Are you
Fire
ready?
away. Yeah,
Let's go.
let's do it.
Firstly, what is the voice? Where did it come from and whose idea was it?
Okay. So the voice, very simply put, is an advisory committee. So what we're proposing, what we're asking the Australian public to do is support us and agree to recognising Indigenous people in the Constitution by way of a voice to Parliament. So there's two parts to that. One is symbolic. We do want to be part of the Constitution. To be excluded, and I think this is something that everyone can relate to. If you've ever been excluded from something, it really impacts how you see yourself and how you fit in to that landscape. So, um, that is important for us to be included and recognised as the first peoples of this country. Um, but more than symbolism, we wanted to make practical change. Um, there we talk about closing the gap a lot. We have done so for a long time. We know that the disadvantage experienced by Indigenous people is unacceptable in a developed country. I'm someone who's worked in remote communities, so I live in the Northern Territory, but I live in Darwin, but have worked in Arnhem Land and Central Australia. And for anyone who hasn't had the opportunity to go out to communities, um, it's both beautiful, but also can be really heartbreaking because there are things out there that just shouldn't be happening in Australia in terms of like electricity and water and things that you take for granted in town. Some communities are having up to 200 um, interruptions to electricity in a day. So, for anyone who stores medications in fridges and things like that, that it's a real risk, a real health risk. It's also just very uncomfortable and hard to live like that, having intermittent access to electricity, running water, these are basic human needs. We've got people living in overcrowded houses still. Imagine being a child and you're trying to attend school, but you're sharing your home with 20 or 30 family members and one bathroom. It's not just uncomfortable, it's actually unsafe. So we really need to see change, practical change. So, as well as being recognised in the Constitution, we're taking this opportunity to say one of the ways we can make real change is to be heard. And so, anyone who values um, the idea of lived experience informing decisions, informing policy, informing legislation can probably relate to this request where we want to have a say on the things that affect us. So it's quite a simple proposal. The reason we're doing it, we want to enshrine the voice in the Constitution, is we want that voice body, that advisory committee, to have stability and security. Because what we've learned over many years from the work of our elders, whenever we've stood up representative bodies before and given advice before, we've been very vulnerable to different governments. So one government would stand up the representative body, and then we'd have a change of government and they would silence it, abolish it. Then the next one would stand up another, and we go on this cycle. And it means that our advice is often not as frank and fearless as it should be as well, because we have been silenced by government. So we're concerned about the advice that we give. This body that we're proposing would be completely independent, and it would be selected by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And it wouldn't answer to a minister. It would simply provide advice to the parliament and to the government. Now, where did it come from? It came from us. So, and it came from years and years of consultation. It came from decades of work by our elders. And in 2017, after thousands of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people were spoken to about this over a number of meetings, the information from those consultations was taken to Uluru, their National Constitutional Convention, and that's where the Uluru Statement from the Heart was born. I would encourage every listener, if you haven't already read the Uluru Statement from the Heart, please go and read it, because that's the foundational story of this movement that really fills in the gaps of why we've put up this proposal and why we're requesting that Australians vote yes and come on this journey with us to right the wrongs of the past and make the future better for all of us.
Thanks, Jade. That's such a great orientation through the issues and the history. And being heard is certainly something that we identify with in our community, supporting people with mental health issues. In fact, just this year, it's been announced that we will have a new set of bodies representing mental health consumers and mental health carers. But absolutely that issue of making sure that what is created is sustainable and long-term and not impacted by change of government is something we can identify with really strongly. I wondered if you could tell me a little bit about the Uluru Statement from the Heart and what the opportunity is for non-Indigenous Australians. From my understanding, there's an invitation involved in that. What could we get excited about as non-Indigenous Australians? What's the opportunity here for us? What might that look like in the future once the voice is established?
Look, is it helpful if I share the Uluru Statement from the Heart with you?
That would be wonderful.
Yeah, okay. Because Look, it's one page, it's 439 words. But what I can tell you, Rachel, is it really takes you on a journey and it talks about the issues, the struggles, but it gives us a way forward. So, for me, I get a lot of inspiration and hope. And I think this will really illustrate what the opportunity is, not just for Indigenous people, but for this whole nation. So, this is the Uluru Statement from the Heart. We gathered at the 2017 National Constitutional Convention, coming from all points of the southern sky, make this statement from the heart. Our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander tribes were the first sovereign nations of the Australian continent and its adjacent islands, and possessed it under our own laws and customs. This our ancestors did according to the reckoning of our culture from the creation, according to the common law from time immemorial, and according to science more than 60,000 years ago. This sovereignty is a spiritual notion, the ancestral tie between the land, or Mother Nature, and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who were born therefrom, remain attached thereto, and must one day return thither to be united with our ancestors. This link is the basis of the ownership of the soil, or better, of sovereignty. It has never been ceded or extinguished, and it coexists with the sovereignty of the Crown. How could it be otherwise that peoples possessed a land for 60 millennia and this sacred link disappears from world history in merely the last 200 years? With substantive constitutional change and structural reform, we believe this ancient sovereignty can shine through as a fuller expression of Australia's nationhood. Proportionately, we are the most incarcerated people on the planet. We are not innately criminal. Our children are aliened from their families at unprecedented rates. This is not because we have no love for them. And our youth languish in detention in obscene numbers. They should be the hope for our future. These dimensions of our crisis tell plainly the structural nature of the problem. This is the torment of our powerlessness. We seek constitutional reforms to empower our people to take a rightful place in our own country. When we have power over our destiny, our children will flourish. They will walk in two worlds and their culture will be a gift to their country. We call for the establishment of a First Nations voice to Parliament, enshrined in the Constitution. Makarrata is the culmination of our agenda, the coming together after a struggle. It captures our aspirations for a fair and truthful relationship with the people of Australia and a better future for our children based on justice and self-determination. We seek a Makarrata Commission to supervise a process of agreement making between governments and First Nations and truth-telling about our history. In 1967, we were counted. In 2017, we seek to be heard. We leave base camp and start our trek across this vast country. We invite you to walk with us in a movement of the Australian people for a better future. So that statement was created in 2017. There were 270 leaders who were Indigenous leaders who were at Uluru, and the statement was endorsed by 250 of those leaders. It was received by standing acclamation and tears of joy. That was a real moment in our history. And to get agreement amongst, 270 people there and 250 people agreed, that's an overwhelming majority. So, a really exciting time for us. And as I said before, the work that went into that, the lead up. So there were 13 regional dialogues held across the country. They each went for 3 days. One of those days was specifically about civics because, it's really important for people to understand the Constitution, what it does, what it doesn't do, how change can be made. And the conversation was, really about how do we want to be recognised and how can we work together to close the gaps. and get better outcomes. And yeah, that resulted in the Uluru Statement from the Heart. And really, the key points, the things that really speak to me out of that statement, is the fact that it's an invitation to Australian people. So previously in our history, Indigenous people have petitioned kings, queens, parliament. We've begged to be included and to have a voice. We shouldn't have had to, but we have, and we've been rejected many, many times. And so the key difference, the thing we learnt from our elders, is we're not petitioning kings, queens, or governments. We're asking our fellow Australians to come on this journey with us and do it together. And I feel like there's so much hope and opportunity and unity in that. And to do that, the first step of doing that is simply voting yes on the 14th of October. That's what opens all of this up.
Thanks so much for sharing that. What a privilege it is to have you read the Uluru Statement to us and for me in particular to get to hear that. It really is a beautiful invitation, and it struck me listening to you how many of those principles align with what we talk about in recovery, about taking that first step, and this being an invitation to us to really walk together. And from what I understand, this change to the Constitution is the first piece that then enables those further processes to happen, so that, our government is listening better to change outcomes for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and communities around the country. It also struck me just the scope. I mean, that's years of work and, many, many communities inputting through quite a comprehensive process. And it's really important, I think, for people to understand that even if they've only started hearing about it this year, actually the work's been going on for a long time. It isn't a thought bubble. It isn't a Canberra thing. It's really come from quite a deep level of communication around the country. I'm really excited about that vision for the future. I have kids too, and preschools in my town do a great job these days of talking to kids about history and sharing Indigenous culture. It's lovely hearing them come home. Just the other day, my children were part of a choir at their school assembly singing the national anthem with a verse in language, Dharawal language, I believe. And it was just lovely to hear. That to me is the kind of thing that we'll see more of as part of, that walking together, and critically this change of a voice that can't be swayed by political whims, but able to really ask questions and make representations. It's a great first step. Before we wrap up, what are the top facts that you want to clarify for people about the referendum? What do people really need to understand?
Yeah, look, I want to make it really simple, because a lot of noise and disinformation has made this more stressful than it needed to be. So the key points to remember about this proposal: what we're voting on, what you're being asked is, do you agree that Indigenous people should be recognised in the Constitution by a voice to Parliament? The voice is simply an advisory committee that can make representations to Parliament and the executive government about things that matter to us. Those things will be decided by communities, and those representatives on that advisory body will take the important things to Parliament and executive government. So when you're hearing silly things like we're going to influence parking fines or where submarines are parked, let me tell you this. This will make sense to everybody, that we're dying earlier than our counterparts, our non-Indigenous counterparts. Our life expectancy is shorter by about a decade. Our infant mortality rates are through the roof, and they don't need to be. We're losing a lot of Indigenous people unnecessarily. We're the only ones that have rheumatic heart disease. There are diseases that we're suffering from that no other developed country are experiencing. So while we've got these harmful things happening in these, huge levels of disadvantage, do you think we're going to waste time talking about parking fines? No, we're going to be focused on the really important stuff that's going to change our lives. So, important to cut through the noise here. This advisory committee is not going to take anyone's backyard. In fact, it's not going to take anything from anyone. It's going to be about giving government good advice, because when they've got good advice, they make better decisions and we see better outcomes on the ground. It's the same principles as anytime we bring lived experience to the decision making table. It does work. We know it. We've seen it in so many areas. So um, I am imploring people to vote yes, because voting yes is saying yes to possibilities. It's
Mm.
saying yes to us being heard, and it's saying yes to recognition and inclusion, which we all know as humans that's really important for your well-being, and it's important for the country. We want to unite the country. And saying no is simply accepting the status quo.
That's a really helpful explanation, Jade. And, from there's a parallel here for SANE. We've made edits to our company constitution in the last year to clarify the role of lived experience. So we declared that at least a majority of board directors should have lived experience, and that my role became an identified role. Those changes in a constitution as a governing document are simple ones. They're really clear and we get the wording exactly right. But the detail happens later in a plan. And so I think one thing we've seen people being curious about is why there isn't more detail. But that's how constitutions work. You set the rule or the principle, and then you work on the detail. And as I understand it, that's going to be something that Parliament's involved in. Drafting legislation takes quite a lot of time. But that fundamental principle, do we agree that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people should be recognised in the Constitution? Do they deserve to have a voice? It's such a simple yes from us here at SANE. And for those of you who are worried about what those representations might be about, as we've heard you say earlier, think electricity, think housing, think roofs, think schools, and think Indigenous community healthcare. And though that's a pretty straightforward thing for us to understand, Aboriginal people having a voice on Aboriginal issues. I think that's really a helpful way of hopefully breaking it down for people in our community who might be a bit unsure. Jade, can I ask you one last question? How are you travelling through this? We've heard from our community just how challenging it can be with seeing the debates and seeing particularly some of the stuff that online that can be really hurtful. What do you do to stay well?
Yeah, look, it has been quite a grueling campaign, and the I guess the way I'm getting through this is really calling on my support network. I already had an established support network who I try to check in with. I'm on the road a lot, and it's important to keep that connection with people back home and people with lived experience. We're sharing this. So, particularly my own family who understand, some of the more personal attacks on my identity, my cultural identity, have been the hardest things to cope with. And so, it's really my family who understand that, who I seek support from. And I'm a real water baby. So wherever I go, I try to, and I'm about to do it here. I'm at a place called Bellingen, and I'm about to go and put my feet in the river. So regardless of how busy I am, I'm trying to just carve out time for something that I know is good for me, which, for me is water. So, and just good nutrition, rest when I can get it. And yeah, just
That's
trying to get outdoors when I can.
That's wonderful advice, Jade. And for our community, we'd really echo that. We will also post with this video some resources from Wellmob about ways to maintain your wellbeing through the last days of this referendum campaign. And I love that suggestion. Lean on your support network, be with family. We know Wellmob are also suggesting people make sure they're taking time away from following the content and take a digital break. But that's a great suggestion too. Put your feet in the river, jump in the ocean, and that the importance of of country as a part of healing and staying well. That's such great
Yeah.
advice.
And for people who want to be involved and be active in the campaign, go back to some old-fashioned methods. It doesn't all have to be done digitally. That is a great tool, but go and have a yarn with someone face to face, because that can be a much nicer interaction, particularly if people are unsure. If people are a firm no voter and you can't shift them, then don't waste your energy and your well-being on that. But some people just want to have a yarn about it, and I think that can be a really nice connection point. Sharing your why. Why are you voting yes? I love telling people my why. My why is my children. So there's nice ways where we're really encouraging people to have respectful conversations about this referendum and use this as a unifying moment.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for speaking with me, Jade. It's been lovely to meet you. What a privilege it is to have you take some time out of your very busy schedule to share some information with our community. We really appreciate it and wish you all the best with the remainder of the campaign. We will be walking alongside you in support. SANE is very proud to be supporting a yes vote and supporting the creation of a voice to Parliament on October 14. We really encourage our community to stay informed and vote yes on October 14. Thanks again,
Thank you.
Jade.
Thanks, Rachel. Thank you, everyone.